Welcome everybody to the Community and Economic Development Committee. How do you say that? Let's go around and introduce ourselves. I'm John Weddleton.
Dick Trainee of Sunlight.
Pete Peterson.
Christopher Constant.
Sean Rebel, planning.
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Amy Grabowski.
Felix Uriah.
Bill.
Phil Steyer, GH Electric.
Ryan Yell, planning.
Barbara Jones, Clerk's Office.
Jedediah Smith, AMCO. Patrick Flynn, not assembly.
Jordan Hunt's Great Northern Cannabis.
Steve Bashir, Great Northern Cannabis, and I think there's somebody on the phone as well. Jason Brandeis is on the phone.
Kerry Kerrigan, Alaska Marijuana Industry Association.
Nick Miller, Anchorage Cannabis Business Association.
Chris Usher, Baker's Cannabis Business Association. Jan Alstein, KW Council.
Thank you. And on the phone there is someone?
The attorney for Great Northern Cannabis.
All right, thanks. That was Jason.
Yep, Jason Brandeis.
Okay, so Great Northern Cannabis is in front of us. Mandy, you want to go through the license?
Yep. So Great Northern Cannabis, the retail store, the licensing conditions were addressed in their operating plan. There were no taxes, fees, or fines found due by any of the licensees or affiliates. They also have a cultivation license, which was previously approved. There's no overlap in their premises. There were no recommended conditions to add from the clerk's office.
All right, thank you. Sean?
Yep, okay, so the applicant, Great Northern Cannabis, with Steve Bashir, is applying for a special land use permit for marijuana retail sales establishment. It's gonna total approximately 3,000 square feet of a to be licensed space. The establishment will be located within an existing building at 541 West 4th Avenue, and the proposed store is within the downtown P2B district. The use is consistent with the downtown comp plan and the Anchorage 2020 comprehensive plan. One public comment and objection was received. The applicant, though, has been attending multiple downtown community council meetings and is actively involved in working with them and the local residents. The plans that were submitted to the planning department don't show any major alterations to the building or structure that would, other than the facade work, none of that would be out of character with surrounding uses or buildings. The planning department recommends approval of this special land use permit subject to the conditions found in the staff report.
All right, thanks. Any comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've noticed there's a couple of different square foots mentioned in here. There's 3,000, this is 2,975, 3,250.
Yeah,
It's not gonna cause a problem going
No,
forward.
the license, what they're applying for is the licensed premises is gonna be 3,000 square feet. That's what they put on the application and to the state.
Okay.
The building side itself might be a little bit different, just a few more square feet, that's what you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
Dick?
There's also coming in for manufacturing permit. I saw something in here, reference manufacturing permit too. Are they gonna be applying for one of those? That would be a question for Steve.
Oh, you're welcome to sit up here.
Sure. So, obviously, we have the cultivation facility already. We haven't applied for a manufacturer license yet at this time. It's possibly in the future, but not at this location. It would be at a different location in a different part of the city, yet to be determined.
Thank you.
Anything else? Question, and I think we've seen this before, but this obviously has a huge list of owners. And then two are like LLC or capital investment companies. And in those cases, so we need a name associated with that or names. So we also have all of this for the owners of those. I think in each of those cases we find first. But the process is, so as far as violations of laws and stuff like that, you check with those individuals. And
Yeah.
the code's really clear then that if you have a corporation that's one of the owners, all the people involved.
Right, and they do in their application with the state, it has the breakdown of the LLC and who owns the LLC. And it's people that were already listed, that, yeah, it breaks that down.
evidence was there is a faction of business owners and property owners in the downtown who have suddenly come to awareness that marijuana businesses are happening 2 years after the fact, and have made in no uncertain terms clear that they believe that we should stop the process now so they can get organized and close. And my comments back to them were that it doesn't really seem fair at this time to change the rules at the last minute. And again, what they've said is we'd like them, not a moratorium, but we'd like you to
We
stop
just don't
these
want our area.
licenses. And so I have, on a number of occasions, recommended that they go to their community council, because that's the process we've established under the charter and through this committee to make those comments and through the neighborhood responsibility planning. And those people decided that that wasn't their thing. They didn't feel like they were gonna get what they wanted out of that group, so instead they were coming straight to you and I. And so what I can say, if you look in this packet right here, on page 10, Jordan over here has not only gone above and done the work in the community council, but he's actually sought and now serves as an elected member of that council, right? And so through the neighborhood responsibility planning process, we had envisioned a time when these businesses would engage in the community. Here's evidence that it's working. And so I welcomed the proponents of the moratorium, or not moratorium, but stopping businesses, whatever they want to call it, to come forward, and as of yet, all we've seen are emails. And so I can't see any reason to object to this business. They've done what they've been asked to do. They've followed the rules as established over the last 2 years. This process, as you all know, is incredibly rigorous and detailed and thorough. And everything that they've asked for in their list is in some way already embedded in the process, if they had been part of the process along the way. And their primary message to me was, well, we weren't involved because we're busy, right? And it just didn't create a lot of sympathy for their cause, because all of us are busy. So that's kind of my opinion on that question.
Okay. Can I just follow up real quick? So, you know, I've been involved with this, did that, they sent out on May 5th, 482 public notices, which would cover a big chunk of downtown, is that right? 500 feet,
Yeah.
you're getting.
Right.
And when did the people look for a moratorium get fired up? Was it before then? Yeah.
Well, I could look back. I think it was probably in May that I had a meeting with two of the primary proponents of this, and they had set today as their Maginot line. They wanted to stop these businesses today. And so, of course, for me, it felt really like it might have been a personal issue or a private, you know, I want to look out for my own interests issue, not kind of that broader question. But, so it's been an ongoing discussion. It's a discussion that I imagine we will be seeing more of. But at this point, all I asked for them was to send me a letter with their signatories on it, and I still haven't even seen that, asking for what they're asking for. And so they've utilized the downtown partnership, and as you have seen in that communication from them, they're a little bit confusing in what they're asking for. They're saying we don't want a moratorium, but we want a moratorium, right? That's essentially what the letter says. Our board doesn't want a moratorium, but we'd ask you to wait. And so at this point, I see no cogent, organized message from the downtown businesses or whomever they are, right, that would warrant.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have 482 public notices went out, one comment back, but it kind of says it's probably broad to people aware.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we've said from the very beginning that we were not gonna limit licenses. We felt that would create a secondary market, and we've been down that path with liquor licenses and taxi cabs, and I don't think we wanna go there. Downtown is probably a good location, excuse me, for retail. So, you know, they shouldn't be surprised that people are gonna find empty storefronts and attempt to put a marijuana retail store there. And so, I mean, if I was gonna do this, that's probably where I would want to put one. So, I think the idea that we should have a moratorium or limit them in one part of town versus another part of town is not a good idea.
One thing I've seen is email from Tony Knowles and Newman. I've not heard any other email from anybody else opposing this, so who's this crowd that's out there?
So I can speak to that. They've done a pretty good job of contacting local business owners, and I ran into one friend last night, this issue, and she said, oh yeah, I signed the letter that they asked for, because I don't want 18 or 19 marijuana businesses opening downtown. And I keep asking these folks, where are you coming up with that number? And I actually researched this with Mr. Gill over here, how many applicants we have, because every time I hear from these people, there's like 2 more in their list. The number keeps growing. At some point, it's going to be exponential. There are 7 total, including operating and potential applicants coming at this time. And so there's not 17 or 20 or 25, but that's the message that's getting circulated to the business owners in the downtown. And so there are just concerns about, do we want half of our downtown businesses to be marijuana businesses? But at this point, that's not reality. So it's business owners.
Maybe you should give them the map we had which shows marijuana outlets per assembly.
In your district, no,
I
absolutely.
got double what you've got, so I'll give them a few.
And I'm looking.
I'll put 1 in there if you take 4 of mine.
Exactly. I'm looking forward to this process working itself out, because I think that for most of the complainants in the question, they're going to change their opinion once they see the facts and not just listen to the heated kind of strong opinion. I was shouted at in rage by someone you mentioned who, was believing that his rage would persuade me in some way, and I was even told in the funniest
Go ahead and
ways.
just say it. Just say it. I want to hear it.
The former governor, Democratic governor of Alaska, asked me why I can't be more like Amy Dombosky in fighting to restrict.
You don't have a lace for it or what?
Hair's too short.
That is actually a reality of what happened, and I just sat back and thought I have finally come. But I am here. So it's not persuasive, though, when you think about all the work that these people have done over the last 2 years, the personal cash investments they've made, the rules that they followed, every rule that has been asked of them, every hoop that's been set up, they're jumping, and they're jumping high and through and clear. And so that it just doesn't make any sense to give in to short-term emotion.
These people about 3 years too late. They wanted to stop marijuana. They're way behind. Agreed. Hey, Mr. Chairman.
The person that received the public notice was Colleen Hickey, just for the record, that won in opposition.
No 4 times?
Yeah, well, 5. 1, 2, 3,
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. So I had, my comment on this whole issue is, clearly, these licensees are operating within the spirit of the law that's been set up, and I've seen no deviation from that. So at this, it's always important to take community concerns. And we'll do that in public testimony, but, it is what it is, and they're operating within the law, so I'm not really gonna give that a whole bunch of time today, I don't think, in my view. But I do have a question for you, Sean.
Yep.
As I'm reading through the application, I saw where multiple times it says the standard's been met regarding separation distances, but it doesn't say what's like the closest, or I didn't see it. The closest, protected land use near this particular establishment?
Let's see here, so we went out the wheel, Ryan, do you remember what that, like 6?
I will say, we've gone kind of back and forth
Yeah.
on this issue because the regulations state 500 feet separation distance, that standard is met. So is it necessary to state
Yes,
something
it
that's
is.
501 feet away?
It is, and I'll tell you why it is, because, if you look at the Cole memo, if you look at the guidance from our own, city council, city attorney, they've clearly acknowledged to the assembly that we should go to 3,000 foot, because they said it could become an issue, especially with the federal government. So from my perspective, when somebody comes in less than 1,000 feet, it doesn't mean it's a declining factor, because in my view, in the municipality, especially in Cole, 500 feet is the standard. But I think it's in the best interest of the applicant and the city to basically cover all of our bases and confirm to them, look at them in the face and say, you do understand you're under the 1,000 feet that was recommended to us by our attorney, and you may have federal issues if the federal government comes in and does something. So, this is the first application I've seen where I haven't actually seen a number for separation distance. And I would like to see that, because I think it's important for us to put on the record just to say, we told you so, if something happens. And I just want them to go in and say, and know their risk. That's it. It's not a deterring factor, it's just, when people get into business, they know the risks they take, and I just don't want them to be blindsided, like something they never thought of. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
question, Amy, you don't normally ask that.
Yeah, so, am I hearing the separation distance is less than 1,000 feet?
Yes.
What is the closest protected land use?
It's that downtown city church. That's down there.
Cathedral or something.
Yeah, it's in the Sunshine Plaza.
Oh,
It's in Sunshine Plaza.
Okay. But it's not a school,
No.
so that mitigates your risk there. So you guys do understand the whole conversation we just had. You understand the risk you're assuming by being within 1,000 feet. Now, it's not a school, so I think it greatly diminishes that potential risk, but I'm not a lawyer. And so you have a high-paid lawyer on the line listening. But I just want to make sure you guys understand the difference between going within that 1,000-foot separation distance. It's not something to beat you over the head with. I just want to make sure people aren't caught off guard if something changes that's outside of the city's control.
Just don't. Because we have seen before, that, what are the nearby things? So now we're saying, okay, can you go tell us what the closest one is? Is this double your work, or what are these doing?
They've been doing it. Oh, wait. Hang on a second. It's not double your work. Let's back up the train here. Okay, so I have to pre-warn everybody, I have not had my morning coffee, so my lovely personality has yet to come out. But in our past applications, we have clearly listed what the protected land uses were in health.
Not every
A lot of them. And they've all said,
We did go out and measure it. I didn't write it down. If you want, I can go out and measure it again and put some.
no, you could just give me the estimate.
It's roughly 650 feet, I believe.
See, that's all I want. Because when it's not in here, I feel like somebody's hiding something.
Oh,
from me.
no.
And I don't think that's the intent at all.
We
Is it?
state
I'm looking
right
at you, Ryan.
Well, we state in that a separation distance is met, and that's the rules and
Yeah.
regulations that the municipality goes by. That's what we get paid to do, so that's what they do.
Well, what I get paid to do is ask you the questions, so just know every committee meeting, I'm gonna ask you on every application.
We'll start putting in the distances.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Anything else? Recommendation?
I'm in a meeting right
I'll recommend approval.
Yeah.
Second it, we'll just get it.
Any opposition? Okay. So, I'm sorry. go ahead.
Yeah, I just would say, separate from this question. No, I'm not. I didn't vote. I don't have a vote here. But the matter of the moratorium and its full breadth of conversation, I'm recommending to come here if they organize enough to the point of action. So just FYI, it will start here if they get organized.
No, but any assembly member could make a motion to postpone this until a date certain.
And I would not do that.
I know, I'm just saying, 'cause we got 11 people.
Yep.
One of them could.
Let's talk
They
about
get
that.
6, it goes there.
I'm gonna just wrap up just real quick. So you guys did this first. So we will recommend at the assembly or state that this group recommended approval. You know, it could go any way, of course, at the assembly.
They will have better parking since I see one of the owners. It's parking.
Yeah, bring all the owners. So anyway, we'll see you Tuesday. So regarding the moratorium, how much you want to have it? Just see
Well,
where it develops.
There's no people.
I'm just gonna give you my own personal perspective. I'm gonna have to see a cause, or basically a basis, right? What is the basis? Can they show me significant public harm? Or is there a significant event that was unanticipated that all of a sudden has popped up, and get to see this? And I've been on this, not just this committee, but the marijuana committee that was established from the very beginning. So I yet to see a basis. I mean, as Dick said, we've been doing this for 3 years now, and everybody who was concerned was at the table. And that's why, though Governor Knowles may, hold me in high esteem, it wasn't an anti-marijuana. It was really reflecting the values of my community to make sure that there's certain things in the community were protected under the separation distancing. I mean, that's what it is. So I think it's important, but, they can come to us, but I think in order to get any significant movement, they're gonna have to show basis. Yeah.
There is no moratorium to even discuss in front of us right now.
Nope.
If some assembly member on Tuesday wants to bring a hold forward on this to give them time, then we can deal with that, because it takes 6 hours to do that. We can't stop a member from bringing it forward. But there's nothing in front of us right now.
Yep, I understand. I just can guarantee you that at some point in the future, this group of people will organize to the point where we are gonna have this conversation in a thoughtful way. And I agree, the cause is key, because the process has been laid out very thoroughly, and the process is fair, and it would be quite unfair, in stop for businesses that have already invested $50,000 to $100,000 and say, well, someone wasn't there when we were going through this process, and so we're gonna give them a chance to catch up. That doesn't make any sense to me, so, but again, I can't be the lone voice saying that, and in the end, I probably will need the voice of this committee, and then maybe further up if it goes further up, but.
Well, and every assembly's going to weigh in at the meeting, but I would think, there's a lot of things, and it's not just unintended things. I mean, there are a lot of people, half the city, basically, who's very concerned about potentially going forward in this direction. And so if after opening all these shops up, and all of a sudden, we're seeing harm to the community, that, that the community is saying, hang on a second, this isn't what we asked for. Then that would be, then they have to show some sort of data, some sort of information. It's not just all of a sudden today I realize there's gonna be a pot shop next to me and I don't like it. I mean, I can understand that sentiment completely, but again, if you wanna sponsor an ordinance doing it, which you obviously don't, I think that's how they have to go. They have to get an assembly member to sponsor something. But I think it's kind of this one.
Just that the state's taking no responsibility, they're gonna issue many permits as they're asked for. So if you want a moratorium by type or something, type or area, the state's gotta get involved, and not see the state take any steps forward in this issue, no license.
Yep.
They wanna dump it on us. Quite frankly, I've got enough marijuana places in my district, I'll give you a few.
The wisdom of this group is the dual license. You did something really amazing.
We did that on purpose.
And that, to me, results in question, because any particular operator who fails to perform can be stopped tomorrow. And that's the bottom line of the protection that the community has at this time, which is vastly superior to what occurred with alcohol. And therefore, I have no concern about the operation of these businesses, because they are operating to the highest level of requirement. All of them have been, except for one at the very beginning, who got smacked. So
Yeah, I tried.
he got smacked.
It's in my area, I know who it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I was on the marijuana committee from the beginning, and so was Amy. We had, 15, 18 meetings downtown. So if someone who was concerned downtown, it was certainly convenient for them to have come to us and protested from the beginning. Never heard a thing from them. So they're late to the table. Now, they may show up Tuesday in full force at our meeting to try to stop this. And, maybe they can get enough of us to vote no on it. But they just got a late start, I guess. And it shouldn't have been a surprise. Downtown was going to be a prime location seen by many entrepreneurs that may want to, have a retail outlet. And so I just think they're way too late at this point.
I've been at this since the beginning, and we've never heard anything from the town, anybody saying moratorium down here. 3 years ago was another time, a couple of years ago, but not now. The last one we've got this in front of us. So, I'm not afraid of stopping it.
Can I say one last thing? All I say is for those who might go back and listen to this audio, we have public testimony for a reason, right? Public testimony is for an opportunity for people to bring up issues or concerns they have that maybe we missed. So I think we all have to remember to be open to that. Just in case, there could be something we missed completely that might have relevance. And if that's the case, then, at least something we have to say is we would make a determination, somebody would make a motion to do something to address some potential issue coming forward. So, I wouldn't say necessarily just because it's here it's a slam dunk, but from what I'm seeing in the ordinance and the license or the resolution, I don't see anything that is outside of the scope and the rules that have been set up.
Maybe you would have had to see more no's in here than just one person with 5 no's on it. If they sent as many notices out as they said they did, which I assume they did, we'd have 50, 60, 70, then we'd take a look at it, but I've not seen that come forward with this one.
Francis?
Yeah, I had a thought to share. So there's a flip side to the center of this discussion, right? Which is you can be neutral about marijuana until a marijuana business becomes your neighbor, and then that's where kind of rubber meets the road, and it becomes real. And there could be fear about these businesses and being your neighbor, attracting undesirable people, or seeing a marijuana business down the street and seeing new people brought to the neighborhood, in seek of those products or whatever, that could be a positive or a negative. But it's, if you want to make a similarity with a liquor store, say, it could be that, people in downtown, could have similar sort of opposition to a type of business like a liquor store, because they see, well, we're fine with a certain number, but an over concentration of it is viewed to be a negative. And so I just wanted to point out that, so that we're all not thinking the same, that people can oppose something once they see it move into the neighborhood, because it is change, and there is that argument that too many of one type of business could be a negative.
Well, and I brought up the density issue last year, and I asked the members of SNARD actually, West Anchorage, I said, you guys are starting to see, they were starting to refer to it as the Green Mile. I said,
That's in my area.
oh, is it? Okay. Well, I just started asking
King Street.
you guys, has anybody even considered a density issue when it comes to land use? And at that point, it was kind of the consensus of the group was, well, let's just wait and see. And I went straight to the members of that district and asked, so.
Well, and I would add, Francis, to your point, that I am extremely hyper vigilant, cognizant of the fact that you can't have a concentration of too many of one kind of business in a neighborhood. I won't get into the details of that now because it's all read my mind. And bottom line is, we are sensitive to it, and we have established a process, and that's to go to your community council. And the charter says do it, and that's where their opportunity lies. And if they have a group, a community council downtown is a dozen people, maybe 30 on a really, really, really busy night. If there are 50 of these business owners that signed this letter, they could steer that conversation by simply showing up. And so I recognize their fear, and I have challenged them to act in the way that the charter allows, and I have yet to see action. And so I'm, again, cognizant to what your perspective is on that question. People don't want to see change. I personally don't want to see empty lots downtown with for lease signs and people fleeing the downtown. And so, and frankly, in honor of this industry, I look at who's investing in our town right now, and I see housing developers are investing because housing is a crunch, and I see people investing cash in making these storefronts look good and quality. And I don't want to get in the way of new jobs in my district, because people need to work in order to have a quality of life. And that to me is important. And I do challenge those folks to go to their community council and speak, because they will be heard. It's an elegant system.
Thanks. Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to echo Mr. Vosky and Mr. Constant. Mr. Trini, you weren't there, but a couple of meetings ago of Aguiluk Community Council, they did bring up for the first time the density issue, because Aguiluk's getting quite a bit. So I think as some of these particular areas get more density, they'll probably start talking about it. So I agree when I echo Mr. Constant that it will probably be something that will come back to this body.
Just a moment, can I clarify for the record, you said Mr. Trainee missed a community council meeting?
Well, he was at another one. He was at Bayshore Club.
Thank you.
I was eating yours. Remember when you guys weren't there?
All right.
I was there. Can you guys in Pine do me a favor? I need a density map showing type of marijuana outfits in the semi-district, so because we used to get with alcohol, we used to get bars, we used to get package stores, so we could do the same thing with marijuana. If the question is density, this will give us what we need. It'll show us how many of what type of marijuana in each assembly district.
Could you add a layer to that is applications? Because there aren't that many.
Use another code for application,
Yeah,
but I'm interested in the ones we've got. And application is a good one to have too, because that will tell us where it's heading. But this was very effective when we had the alcohol issues, because I could see I had 10 package stores within a certain area of my district.
From ones that have been approved.
Yeah. If you would. I know it'll take you a while to do it.
Well, also, where do complaints go? If someone has a complaint against the current operation.
Code enforcement.
The complaint
Would
it be possible to get a list of all the complaints that we've had for operating marijuana facilities? And just maybe have that for
just wanted to mention in terms of the density, where the other marijuana businesses are right now in Title 21 resolution. It says the planning department will give this to all other marijuana retail establishments within 1,000 feet when that's in the application. So you already get to see, I think, from plannings of the board, how many of them there are, what density.
Maybe it's that long one, remember, but it's just not on the map.
Right.
Right.
But I wanna see the type density so we can take a look at it.
We've got the GPS.
We said
We'll do that
density.
easily.
We have that, like, rolling list that they keep updating.
Right.
Right?
Just to point out, we did add the community council there in the assembly districts to the publicly available map at the request of this committee.
So you're saying
that
the committee should look at
information
what
is
they
available.
asked for?
I thought I'd seen it. I thought I'd seen it somewhere.
Yeah.
This is community council down there.
Now, there's one other issue that I found very to this conversation. There are a whole bunch of applications that are never going anywhere, right? And so while you might see a long list of potential applicants that have at some step
But
in
we
the
have a
process.
different list of approved ones.
No, I understand that, but the concern that has been brought to me clearly is, oh man, first there were 10 and then there were 17 and 19, right? And I had to go back and look and there were 8, but if you looked at those 8, you had to take 2 of them off because they were at the same address. And it just was an application that was quit and someone else followed through. And so there will never be an applicant in that location at that kind of record, right? And so really it wasn't the whole list of 8, it was closer to 5, except for the 1 or 2 that are already operating, right? And so there's a bit of kind of noise in the data. And I don't know how we correct for that, but that's something that I think is important to understand.
Plus, we also have some people who've already been approved for licenses that are not open for business yet because they haven't got the finances to make all the improvements to get open. And so that's gonna be something we need to keep track of going forward as well.
I would just say, Ryan, I could take that list and cross off the ones of my clients that I know that we've initiated, because I probably have like 25 on there that locations didn't work out. And people didn't do those applications, or like Teresa, they passed away, so there's probably about 3 for her. So I can do that and send it to you. It won't be like official, but it'll be what I know.
Thank you. Some cases, it's the building, you can't get the building permits done, put in what they want, so it's never gonna go anywhere.
Right.
Or there's one on the current list that AMCO denied on our protest because it's right next to the school in a private residence. Right, doesn't fit anything, but it's still on the list of potential licenses.
Yeah, so. Okay, any more on this? Okay, good. So I guess it's just something to be alert to, see what happens with it. So thank you. So let's move on to this.
Please be at the Sunday meeting on Tuesday. And Patrick, that means you too, I wanna see you.
It was a little league game, but all right.
Little league game weren't there.
It is actually. As he said, you're all priority anyways.
You should see some of those kids, they should coordinate it.
Okay, so next up is some changes to the marijuana licensing law that we did something a couple months ago, and then Dean got a hold of it, found some ways to patch it up. And I wondered, so Nick and Chris, are you as representatives of the industry groups? You're welcome to sit up here if you want. Have you gone through this, the licensing changes?
Yeah, I'll go.
Yeah, okay, just, if something comes up, wave your hand and we'll.
I don't know if you've met Terry here, but he is representing the statewide group as well.
Okay, yeah.
And full disclosure, I'm on the board of that. So.
Or Terry, just if you
Terry,
read this.
come on,
and have
join us,
some
we won't
comments.
bite, I promise.
Close enough.
Jason, are you still online?
Jason?
Away. Okay.
I'm still here, I'm sorry.
Okay, have you read are you staying on for the changes to the licensing discussion?
Yeah, I'm over there.
Okay. And have you, Jen and Nick, have you read this and gone through it? Okay, did you have some thoughts on it? Or?
I thought it looked
Don't
pretty
go
good.
through them, yeah, we'll go through them point by point,
Okay.
but just, you looked at it and you're wanting to try to. Anyone else, okay? So I think to start, Dean is going to lead us through it, and there's a number of changes. Do you want to just go through each change, and then we can discuss each one as we get them? Maybe give us a broad overview, and then go point by point.
Sure. I think right overview is kind of wrapped up in the title here. It's basically a bit close to the administration. So I think this is kind of what I use actually to say I can jump into questions with maybe you can speak up at all. Sometimes with this. So I guess we skip whereas space kind of basis for this ordinance go to trees. First is 1080 it's the type of page the use of section E the licenses or this adds a section that purely states that licenses are not transferable. That was the intent all along. But when we first enacted Chapter 1080, we pretty much took a lot from the state's regulations and the licenses are transferable. Similar language wasn't so clear, and the transferability provisions are confusing. So this just it's the license is non-transferable, but a business that owns a license will have interests in the business. Those are transferable. That's not something you really clear with. A corporation can have a shareholder that sells their shares, or an LLC that member sells their own interest. So that just kind of states that I'm explicitly interested. And that's secondary market.
Any questions on this?
So it says the holder of a municipality establishment license that ceases to operate the business shall surrender the license. So in liquor law, we have to, you have to operate that license for 30 days or it surrenders to the state. So in this case, we want to define how long ceases the operation means.
Did you get that?
Well, this doesn't say. So that's something to consider adding in this version. We are intending to honor the so that makes sense that the exclusions and
Okay.
kind of link that through. I don't know if it's necessary to use common laws. It's a good idea. A time frame in the ceases operations for 30 years. I think that would mean we have an open doors with our customers.
Who would be looking at that? Would that be planning, or does that go to code enforcement? Or Amanda, could be you, because you do
Yeah.
license. So would it be helpful to say ceases to operate the business for 30 days?
I think so. I think any added timelines makes it easier for us to, it makes it not so up to interpretation or the decision of somebody looking at it.
So just to clarify, liquor is that you have to be in operation for at least 30 days. Right, or license referred. So, yeah, so you might want to look at that language and then maybe just reference that section. I can send it to you if you want.
So, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So where exactly in this paragraph would be the best place to put that?
Ceases to operate the business, comma, for a period of no less than blank, whatever that number is gonna be, comma, maybe. I could work something up and send it to Mandy or Dean.
Dean and
Mandy.
Barbara.
Barbara, Dean Barbara.
So it's 30 days worth of
I think anytime you can create parity versus discrepancies, I think parity is easier.
We just need to give them 30 days. They need a definite time.
Unless we have a
30
specific
days.
reason why we're not doing it. You know what I mean? I see the problem with what Jeremy's saying.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on that? That makes sense? Good. Okay, go ahead, Dean.
It does make sense to me as well. I don't know if this is in the same section E, but these two, those other sections that are
Okay.
exploration fees, but we're looking to find an appropriate procedure. The next change, we move on down to section 2, is, in minutes, 10-36, so county green results in future closure of basically we have.
Can you speak up a little?
Oh, sure. And, we have someone on the phone as well, right, so make sure we can do it. So this minutes, 10-36 is about renewal. And basically, we have a code that says applications for renewal of GUI if we're looking at them. But what does that mean? We didn't really have any consequence being implemented towards it. There must be some incentive to require time to not implementing. And here's the incentive that's provided by these amendments. If they're delinquent, then if the renewal applications are processed by August 31, then they must close their doors on September 1. You have to file time. That's the advantage of filing a renewal application time before June 30th. Is you are then given that lease time after August 31, even though that's the expiration date set out in code, because you file time right before you close. So basically, you have expirations that have extra status. There's one expiration file time you can see about you probably close September 1st, or renewal applications that will not file time immediately. So we're going to have to close on September 9 if your renewal application has been processed by December. And there's could be a number of reasons. There's it's really processing the renewal application. We have the opportunity for public comment and things like that. Reviews will come up. So there's just a foreseen and it's just that's going to be a time you're about to complete. And then you have applications, but licenses where you haven't filed a renewal application before August 31. And August 31 is the expiration date. If you haven't done it, then you have to close and you have to apply for a new license. So there's two circumstances. And what these amendments do is kind of clearly set those out so that it's much easier to follow. It's much easier for the clerk's office to register, and much easier for the public to understand what happens and what the renewal application does and provides this time.
Thank you. Yeah. Barbara, can you live with this?
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I'll tell you, Mandy and I knew we had a problem here, and we proposed a couple of changes to legal and Dean, and I'll tell you, Dean did some magic here. He produced, exactly what we wanted, and better. It's a cookbook. We understand it. We can implement it, and as Dean said, I think that the public can understand it as well. So we're very happy with this. Thank you.
So by your definition, Barbara, when will they have to shut down if they've not renewed their license?
Well, Dean articulated the three circumstances, and so they're all different. And so one, if you apply during the renewal period, which is the May 1 to June 30th, you sort of get a grace period, and you have until August 31st. We think that's plenty of time. The renewal application is very simplified. You'll see somewhere else in the new code that you do not have to submit your SLUP documents from your previous application. So that makes it really simple. And if you do that, then we should be able to have that before you and get the Assembly's approval by August 31st so that there's no disruption in operations. But if you miss that June 30th deadline, you're in limbo. So between June 30th and August 31st, you can operate. But if the Assembly doesn't approve it, if Mandy doesn't get the approvals to get to you to get the approval done, they have to cease operations on September 1st. They don't, Dean added a provision that you don't have to get rid of your product, which we thought was, you know, a concession. If you don't apply until after August 31st, then you have to start over and then you have to get rid of your product. That's my understanding of how it works. There's a couple of other, you know, little tweaks and details as you go through it, but basically we think that that's, you know, it rewards people who are on time and it punishes people who are late. But the most important thing is it leaves the assembly time to make the decision that the code says you are to make.
Thank you, Barbara, because you're the one that's gonna have to deal with this. So I appreciate your response, thank you.
You're welcome.
To make it clear on that, so it doesn't, because this says, potential closure. This is on A, page 2A. Renewal applications filed after that date are delinquent and subject to marijuana establishment to potential closure. So, is there a process where they would not have to close on September 1?
If you had approved it, for example, so they applied after June 30th, but you approved it, then they don't have to close.
So within that window, we approve it.
Yeah.
Jana?
Wait, so just so I understand this correctly, so if they submit the renewal application after June 30th, but for some reason with the scheduling of the assembly, they don't get heard by the assembly or get the approvals from the assembly until after August 30th, does that have any effect on the grandfather right if like if a protected use moved in after they were there? Okay, it doesn't, okay, so that's fine.
I can't see the circumstances, we're not gonna decide both of them.
Can you speak up a tiny bit?
Yeah, you gotta speak up.
I couldn't hear you.
I'm just saying that I cannot save a situation where somebody's not gonna have a meeting to approve a license. If I've got 30 days, that's 30 days with a meeting, 24 hours a day we can have. The assembly is not going to stop a license because we don't have the time to testify. How many days a week are there? You can have a meeting at any time to approve it. We're not gonna let one go forward to the end of it. Or delay one.
Renewal applications and the approval for them to be city, they're done by resolutions. They've been introduced in consent agenda and approved somehow.
But it works fast.
Maybe there's going to be like 1-2%. It's a lot. Some they just have some issues with all the reviews and so forth that cause the issues and slow down.
Yeah, we recently dealt with an issue on the alcohol side of the house that is related to this issue, and that was the Tequila 51 licensing. And so, this is a really important conversation to be had, and I think that once this is established, I think it's on the statewide and the local advocacy groups to train up their people and keep them up to speed, because there's strong resistance to bending the rules, creating a precedent in order to help people when they haven't done their basic work, their homework.
But Chris, we did deal with Tequila 61.
Absolutely we did, and we did it as quickly as we could, and it was 3 weeks too late for them, and it was brutal.
It was a state issue.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the process to get the initial license, there's so many hurdles to get over that I just couldn't imagine someone who's gone to all that trouble would snooze and not get their, you know, application for renewal in on time. I just find that hard to
I'm
believe.
thinking the same thing right now. I'm thinking, how much money have y'all put in?
Right.
Yeah.
I just don't see it happening.
I think that's good for the first 10 years, and then after we're all gone, it's someone else's up there.
We're not worried about it.
Yeah, that they're.
Well, it's their business. I'm not really
Yeah,
worried
no.
about it at all. to be
Okay,
honest
that's right.
with you.
It's for 10 years from now.
All right, we're on page 3.
You might get through it.
Actually, before we move on, this amendment in subsection A says the renewal application after June 30th is delinquent. But we haven't passed this ordinance yet, and there's renewal applications this year. So I might suggest to the county is put an amendment or resolution to this at the end and that would say something along the lines of, this year, 2017, applications for renewals on student ones until after July, and continue July 31st. So this will try to pass this, and they don't set the potential closure consequence this year.
I think that's reasonable.
So can you write that up then?
Actually,
Good idea,
and
Dean.
not at the end of the meeting, I have a section that's just a which was you, notwithstanding these coordinates. So page 3, at the top, we have some agreements that just say, provide us state license removal application information. And instead of section 108020, it refers to state regulation 3AC-665, which is the state's removal application. 108020 is a reference to the information requirement for a new license application in our code, so that doesn't fit, and that's why that changes there. And then the last phrase added here, except the information regarding the previously approved as well. We just don't want a whole step information all over again every year, so that just says you have to submit. And like I think Mr. Pearson said, the application for renewal should be very simple. You have to go through all the use for special needs communicating.
So is this in addition to the renewal application that Manny's already drafted? No, so that's information, so you don't actually want the state's renewal application, just.
So we do get forwarded this renewal from the state,
From the
so it
state,
is
okay.
gonna be added as part of your renewal.
Okay.
So, it's probably prudent for applicants to make sure that the state's stuff is done and to check to make sure we've received it, but they've been sending it to us, so we get that from the state. And then it's just any modifications, a list of your affiliates, and, copy of your state license.
Okay, I had a comment on this, and it's just really, it doesn't change the intent, it's just a little bit of clarity, but as you read this, you read, provide information required for a state license renewal application under, and then there's a citation with the state code and section 10.8.021, and I'd like to add before that 10.8021, put municipal license under, just to make it really clear that you switch, because you're kind of talking about state code, and then all of a sudden you jump to 10.802. I think we're kind of involved in this, and we know that means, okay, this city stuff, but if someone's just reading this, you read state code, it almost implies that's also, if you're looking for that under state. So just to add a few words to say, and make sure we know AMC, because of municipal. To help out the casual reader. That work?
Sure. In the 10.21, since we're excluding self-information, sort of statement, regarding criminal convictions in the past 2 years, that we have been charged about neighborhoods, ordinance,
Right.
city, current calendar, and nice calendar, sort of thinking, in sort of statements that no licensees passing taxes, fees, and then information that's in terms of state.
And that's 10.8.
That's what's in 2021.
Okay, so good with that. You wanna move on, Dean?
So next we have, in form, I just mentioned the current previous calendar years, the criminal charges and civil violations. And section C is, it's just to account for possibly, maybe there's a transfer of ownership in a city or corporation business license. And securing right around the same time as renewal application period. So you can put them together, that's what that really says. And how to do it,
Pass on that. So they're separate processes though, right? If you have the renewal, but if at any time there's you cross the threshold on ownership, percent of ownership or this almost reads like, okay, well, if you forgot to report back then, you gotta do it again now for real. Is that the sense here? Barbara?
Mr. Webb, thank you. The concern that we had was that these two sections are operating, you know, and you've got this duty to report a transfer, but now you've got a duty to renew. And in my sense that I really like code to be a cookbook and it has to work for the applicants, you know, if the applicant is, okay, it's renewal time and I'm going through the cookbook on renewal. Oh, by the way, you need a transfer if you do X, Y, and Z. So it really is, you are probably correct, it is redundant, but it's just a reminder.
Sort of a belt and suspenders rule.
And this kind of came from with liquor licenses. We've received renewals and then had to go back because the state didn't get the transfer of ownership prior to the renewal. And so this is kind of making sure that the applicants know that they need to come together or the transfer has to come first.
Okay, good, thanks. Anything else on this? Okay, thanks, Steve.
And then the bottom page, using number 6, it's just the cultural policies of information. It's needed for the application of the requested. Moving on to page 4, helping subsection G. And page 4, number 10 through 6, the renewal section. It's she's received approval, but it's not effective for July 1st. So she's not in that, the renewal application is not required. And this is because we have some new license applications that are approved with conditions that haven't actually started operating. The conditions are in there, haven't had final inspection. So why would we require them to submit a renewal application when they haven't even started operating? So that's just
Any thoughts on that?
I just think that makes perfect sense, because that way they haven't got open yet and they've just been approved for a license and then they have to apply for another one. I could see where someone would miss that because we were just there. What do you mean we gotta do another one? So I think that's a good cause. I like that, Dean. Thank you.
Okay, I have one thought just on the wording and that. Can we just delete everything after required on that last line? It just gets rid of to be not required, to be submitted to the municipal clerk. It's the same thing, just to not be required. Because that kind of leaves, oh, should I not send it to Mandy? Do I have to send it to Sean?
What do the legal experts think about that?
I think that makes it clearer, it's just it's not required to be submitted to him, it's not required.
And when Dean was presenting it here, he only said he stopped there.
So it doesn't change the meaning though.
Okay, so are we making an S version or just a series of amendments here?
Dean said he was gonna do an S version, because he's gonna do that other amendment.
Right.
I think, yeah, I'm gonna try to get solution this afternoon and get it in for you tomorrow. The changes that common documents.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that as we go through those changes. Okay. Okay.
So we take out those last rules that are not required. So moving on to next is change to subsection G. And this just kind of more clearly sets out the expiration, the effective expiration. It sets out new subsection 2 that talks about the situations that we mentioned earlier. And I don't know if I can read out more to that. In subsection 2C, so on page 5, we have this provision because in Title 21, in refers to 21.315 C10A, it says this expires when the municipal license or the state license expires. that's our response. So it's expired because we haven't finished processing a renewal application. We don't want this to expire. They filed renewal for August 31 without filing. So this is, yeah, we're not gonna expire our stuff. This is in Title 10, but not in Title 21. But I think it's reflective of this IS that I'm working to do. I would call it comment or the issues of this.
That work? Any thoughts from the industry here? Is this clear?
Yeah.
So Jenna, this is where it's talking about your question. So they are either timely or if they're in that kind of grace period with their renewal, this says that their special land use permit won't expire. So if any protected uses move in, they're still standing for their special land use permit.
This stuff would expire if no renewal application has been filed with the clerk before August 31. Then you have to do a new application. This stuff will expire up to $2. I think that's huge incentive to file a renewal application on time, or at least when talking to them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So should we put in there that they, the language that they, so they know they don't have to, there's no chance that they're gonna lose their special land use permit, that just because they're in the gray area? Can we specifically state that, or?
I think it says it pretty clearly in C.
Oh, okay, all right, I didn't
You
get down to
didn't
see,
get that far.
I just made it to B.
Sorry, I've been
All right.
reading ahead a
Sorry
little
about that.
bit, so.
And just see sort of even if your renewal application is granted, so July 1 bucks, you might have to close, but you're still doing, these would make a decision to approve the renewal, then it never expires the stuff. Or if they deny the renewal, then obviously the stuff's going to expire.
All right, thank you.
I think that's kind of clear on the language there.
That's good. All right, thanks.
Sure. Still going on to bottom of page 5, team page 45. This is about procedures for transferring interest. So we made some changes to the title so it's more clear. I think this just clarifies the whole intent. License itself not being transferable, but businesses, shares, members, single ownerships, and transfers. It doesn't really change, I think, the substance of the law, the code, which is clarifies, but the intent is all along. It also has, I think, the top of page 6, where it says you have transfers of small amounts, but overall, transferring more than 50% of ownership of a business, even though you might transfer 5% here or 10% there, and so forth, as part of funding for operation for one whole transaction. But you have to do transfer of ownership. So, and just to be clear, there's two things that happen if it's less than 50%. Just look for the ownership change. If it's more than 50%, you have to do the transfer of ownership application, which is going to be only 27.
Yeah, so is that in a calendar year, a license period, or is that what happens if there's 10% change or 15% change over 3 years? You know, or 4 years, I can do that.
Well, the controlling interest is controlling interest in any time.
Well, I understand that, but if somebody, you have a license you applied for on 2017, and over the succession of 4 years, you have changed your ownership by a certain percentage that aggregates up to over 50%, right? I don't know that that's spelled out here.
No, I think that's what it's meant to spell out.
Over the calendar year or in 1 year?
I don't think it matters. I mean, at any time, if I transfer in 1 year 25% of my interest, and over the next 3 years, once you hit that 50% or 50% plus 1, you know, 50% plus fraction, I think that's at the point where it would trigger the transfer of ownership. He's no longer a majority owner.
Yes.
Is that how I'm understanding it, Dean?
Yeah, we want to capture the majority owner.
We didn't have a temporal aspect to this numerous transfers provision, and we did talk about that, but we didn't add one. It's gonna be ruled by ruled reasonableness. So I think if you have 3 years apart from some transfers that is going to it's, I think,
Look, my point is this.
to add temporal aspect here, like there's numerous transfers within 3 days, numerous transfers within 3 months. I'm not sure what would be most. This was mostly intended to say numerous transfers, around the same time, and reasonably distributed between the lines.
I thought the point was for us to know if the majority owner of the business is no longer the majority owner of the business. So to me, I don't care if you've made 20 transactions of 1%, as long as you still owe, the other 80%. But if you make, one transaction of 51%, I think that's when you now are not the person controlling the business, and I think that's a public interest, potentially.
One thing that you well knows, every year the license has to be renewed. The rule application requires the list of all owners. So maybe we should bring these numerous transfers to that group. So all we're going to know is the rule application, all the owners are comparative with these years license application.
I'm not hung up on how many transfers there are. I frankly don't care. I think what I care is about who's actually the controlling interest. I think that's what the public concern is. So to me, if I make a whole bunch of transfers in 1 year or over 3 years, if I'm still the majority owner of 75% of the business, I don't understand why it would matter.
It's the other side of the equation that's the issue. Say, and I'm not assuming it's a shady operator, but assuming you have some kind of infusion of illegal capital that's coming from outside, and they didn't want it recognized, and so in this year they transferred 25% or 25.1%, and then and that's
which they have to
August.
file a report
In August,
saying they
and
transferred some percentage, no transfer action, just
Right.
a report.
And then in January, or no, in September, they conduct the other half of that transaction. Then it seems like they've shifted ownership completely. I can see a hole there. I don't know if that's
I don't see a hole though, because any transfer of ownership has to be reported, right?
Right.
The small ones are just a report. But if they do 25% today and 26% in 6 months, that's going to trigger the transfer ownership. But if it's under the 50%,
it won't matter if it's this year and next year.
I don't think so. I think the key is, am I understanding this right, Mandy?
So our understanding of it was, if it was a bunch of small transfers, it wouldn't trigger the transfer of ownership.
As long as they don't go over 51%.
So that's kind of where we came up with tracking all of them, so that we would know. The state sends it to us, but we didn't request percentages on our original application, so therefore we weren't requesting them on our renewal.
If you look at the biannual licenses, they're all listed there.
Yeah.
So, again, in our packets that we get that are substantial, if you look between the state application and our application, we know. And again, it goes back to, it really doesn't matter how many transfers they have. If they're only transferring 10% of their business and they do it in 1 transfer or 10 transfers, it's still 10%. Am I missing something here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the situation that I see potential happening is we have some businesses who are short of capital right now that already have got licenses approved, and so they might be looking for investors to bring capital so they can finally, get open for business. And so, where does that fall in? Is that just covered as part of ownership? Are those personal loans? How is that? Where does that fit?
On the state side, you file MJ-17 would report that little change, right? If you wanted to change more than 51%, you'd have to do a 17A, which would ultimately have to be approved by the control board. I think what Amy's saying and then what Chris is saying is that, if I am I'm an Alaskan resident, but I've really got some other kind of money being funneled in. And the agreement is that I transfer ownership once the person who's not an Alaskan resident establishes ownership. I might do that over a period of time, not to raise flags. And I think that's what Chris is getting at. And I think what Dean was saying, this is a reasonable standard as you know, right now I have 100%. On January 1, I transfer 25%, and then in May, I transfer another 26%. That's reasonable, I think, to file an application under this and have another hearing, versus if I own 100% and then in 5 years I transfer 20%, and then in another 5 year I transfer, you know, 35%, then that probably wouldn't trigger this this amendment here, right? In another way, Matt. I think that's what Dean was saying about the reasonable standard of, you know, are you doing it right now, transferring 20%, 20%, 20%, or are you doing it in a manner of, we have a set of ownership, we've done some transfers that are underneath that majority ownership, and then in 5 years, we tip over that majority ownership just for the way things have changed.
I still, somebody has to explain this to me, because I'm not understanding what you're trying to accomplish here. You just want to see how many times people are transferring ownership. And why is that relevant?
I think what you're concerned about is that you want to know who the majority owner of this entity is, because that's where the control of the entity goes. And I think the way this is written is, you're going to know it if it's within 2 years, but if it changes the majority ownership of who's controlling this entity over a span of like 10 years, you're probably not going to have an assembly very high. I think that's how I'm understanding it.
But don't we have a requirement within this municipal system that if you're a majority owner, right, so that scenario applies, at any time if you become not the majority owner, there has to be a transfer of ownership.
And I think the way this is written, it doesn't necessarily capture that in all circumstances.
Well, I think that doesn't make sense then. Because I think the intent is for us to know who is controlling this business that we may be getting a bunch of complaints about, right, or not. So if there's an issue with that business, we, as the city government, need to know who's the person who owns that business, who's the one who's controlling it. So to me, I don't care if they're doing 50 transfers back and forth to brothers and sisters, it doesn't matter. As long as, if they're triggering, to me the triggering event is the change of majority ownership.
The federal approved banks, lending institutions are not loaning money to marijuana businesses. So they have to get their financing privately. So someone's mother is willing to finance enough to get them open, but she doesn't want to be an owner. Okay, she doesn't want to be an owner of a marijuana business, but she would be willing to loan $100,000 to her son or daughter so they could get open for business and then repay her the money later.
And that's allowed without being an owner in the state.
That's gotta be in a business plan or it's gotta be in a personal agreements or whatever.
Right. But I think what Amy's getting at is a gap here that she's been talking about for a while, about this change of majority interest. I don't know, I would be interested to hear from Dean if I understood this correctly.
It's fine, just jump in. Dean, why don't you consider here, because here we're talking about the transfer of controlling interest, and that's where we're getting bogged down. What we're really looking at, I think, Amy's point, is if it says procedure for change in controlling interest, or change of, so not necessarily transfer, it's just when there's a change of controlling interest, however you get there, that's what we're interested in. So instead of transfer, call it change of, would that work?
Yeah, this section now is all about transfer of controlling interest, changing the controlling interest. Some examples would be very straightforward, like if one person owns 75% and another person owns 25%, then the person owning 75% transfers 60% of their interest. I mean, that's pretty clear to everybody, that's controlling interest. But if the person owning 75% transfers 20% to one person, 30% to whomever, 10% to whomever, there's no longer a 1% with more than 50% of interest in the business. You have this now cases, but overall, we still transfers toward more than 50%. I think that you would want to know that if you want to transfer application, who these people are, nobody owns more than 50% of one person, which I've got several people here now that have, well, part of the difficulty here is this is all hypothetical, right? And I think we want to be able to say, there's more than 50% change in the ownership here, and we want you to do transfer application. So, and administratively, these provisions, the municipal clerk can say, we get these reports of transfers of non-controlling interests, and the aggregate is more than 50%. So we're going to ask you to do, under this clause here, a transfer application, transfer controlling interest application. And I think this company could ask the clerk to look into it and see these reports of transfers of non-controlling interests as well. Maybe this mixes things up a little more than it has to, but I think it's a provision that helps get more oversight to these own business.
Would adding within a license period clarify that it's within 1 year?
See, you're hung up on the time frame. I don't care about the time frame. I don't understand why I don't.
I promise you could change ownership without people knowing if you do it over time slowly. Right, and it would never rise up. How would you know if it wasn't?
Well, every year they have to renew, and every year they have to list their owners.
I think that would, exactly, within a license period, would that clarify?
Can I just say something that I was as I read this sentence earlier, I think my concern is actually addressing the existing law, because it says a person may not receive or transfer a controlling interest in a marijuana establishment license without applying for and receiving the written consent of the assembly. So they can't give away their controlling interest without us finding out, and that's already an existing law.
I think this was just trying to.
And now this is catching what some others are concerned about, which are numerous separate transactions. So I think actually both are covered. You read it the same way I read it, Janet, because you're going to be the one advising these people.
What catches me is what Dean said earlier about the reasonable standard of, and it goes back to, if take Hillside that you guys already approved. Dr. Peterson is 100% owner of that entity, but as time goes on, those people that are also on the license, it's the intent that they all get 20%. So as time goes on, though, that time period can stretch 10 years. And so what Chris is getting at is that, under this reasonable standard, you might not see that controlling interest application come to you.
But we will, because look at the existing law. The existing law says the moment Dr. Peters gives up his controlling interest, it triggers. He has to come before the assembly.
Yeah.
Because it says right here, it says that a control, except as otherwise provided, so hopefully there's no caveat there, a person may not receive or transfer, and it talks about the controlling interest without applying for and receiving the written consent of the assembly. So he could potentially give that 20% and that 20%.
Yeah, and section 4B addresses this. Numerous separate transfers in the aggregate amounts that amount to more than 50%. So Dean hit this in a different section too. So, yeah.
So I think between all of them, I think actually both scenarios are covered.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I just had to go back and read it. Sorry for that diversion.
It's good.
Okay, we good?
I'd like to know, Mr. Constant had suggested in the license plate.
What I'm hearing is it's
I think it is. I think it's already clear for me.
I think you're right.
In the next section.
Okay, so we'll
Now I
make
just
some changes to the.
Yeah. No, I just had to read it with the whole thing in context, but I was focused on that.
Okay, so on basically, so 1080 or 45A, leave it as it is. Okay, good. All right, thanks, Dean.
So on page 6, at the bottom, what we have just changed the senior to those for transfer of controlling interest application. We're not going to require this application all through the, so that's what that is. And then page 7, we couldn't have used to see that on 5. It's just the heading for the subsection D. It's just helps with reading that case. And then, subsection E, line 19, we have deleted, the current language there, it just seemed, that would be addressed in an earlier subsection, in order so that language is the weeds the language to, cross-reference the new application might be required for the transfer control interest around this time. It was going first to allow the new application to see how replace transfer control interest.
That makes sense.
So in section 4, on page 7, we have, and this is the section that's just about reporting a change in ownership, non-controlling interest. So we need to change it all, it's just been recorded, and that's just submitted to the clerk. I think that that's understood for those reports. We look to the assembly or something like that. So the language here also adds if an ownership change, that's a line 41, is due to the death of an individual with not controlling interest. The team's observation for limited time is set forth in section 4.2. We did 45B2 a few months ago. We added that just allows the exit bureau administrative and state to continue at the bottom, page 7, it's the same language that we saw on transfer of controlling interest. Numerous transfers and aggregate. Then go to see the other section on transfer of controlling interest. And here in subsection C on page 8, line 18, we have a new subsection 4, and it's just cross-reference is the first amendment on page 1 to 18. It says it's not transferable and doesn't affect the well, it says ownership change doesn't include the transfer of license itself. And here at page 8, line 39, which is out language title 276, about commencement of operations. We had added subsection D on page 9 in our previous board minutes in 2017-7, where that's out subsection D. We added a new sentence here that was mostly just for clarification. It also tracks how the state is identifying its status of their licenses, which they are approved stages in applications throughout the whole process.
Okay. So is everybody's following along okay? We're good? Silence means good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just check. Okay. Go ahead.
In the changes in section 6, page 9, bottom, it's just another language change. Delinquents may be consistent with the terminology used. And there was a miscitation or section that was there was context. And then last page, minutes 1080, and
You mean to say I guess this isn't the original version, but we're gonna have a late renewal application fee of $0. Does that make sense?
Yes, I noticed that.
Okay.
So we
Yeah.
can't do fees per state requirements.
So not even
So
late.
we originally, when it was drafted, we took the language from the state and they have their late fees. So we did it as
Oh, we'll get part of it, okay.
To clarify, you won't have to send a check for that amount.
We'll not have to send a check for zero of that.
Yeah, we'll take that. We'll take that one.
All right, thank you, Steve.
Jones, which is earlier, it just says that we won't our seashore product if the license is expired, but pending approval of expired products. And it also added, say, catch all of seashore, if you got rated, this is the violation that could be grounds for seizure, and that's just like the code officers, the word seizure. And then section 8 is just eliminating the definition of transfer or transfer. The definition is very much oriented towards the delivery of marijuana from the work product. This just as that section we're talking about transfer of ownership. So the terms and confusing. And then I think I wanted to add one more thing I would recommend for S version. So the chapter 1080 of the code has articles. Article 1 is called licensing fees. And like you just said, we don't charge fees because of this. So we changed the title of Article 1 from licensing fees to maybe just licensing. That isn't in the ordinance yet, but I'd like to add it for this one. So all these sections 108005, the license fee, requiring restrictions, the application rule, and the denial, including on these appeals, fees, 108005 to 1080-100, we should call them just licensing administration. It's not all about licensing fees, which we don't even charge. Well, I welcome suggestions, switching that title.
That's fine, I think.
You know, the licensing fee thing could actually be confusing since they're,
Licensing administration, I think is more appropriate.
since the fee is zero.
So we should say what we need in this?
Make government logical.
Any comments on that? Comments from assembly members?
No, I like all the changes, I think. We're gonna be doing this cleanup for a little bit.
Dean, is there any problem having this effective May 1st, 2017 after the fact?
The restaurant.
Yeah.
It obviously intended to capture the whole renewal application period this year. And that's also why it's just the new section that says for this year, renewal applications aren't due until July 31. So, it's retroactive to accommodate some actions the group's already done in terms of sending out renewal notices. Like, those go out May 1st.
So you got no problem with that then?
Well, I think you can.
I just want to make sure.
There might be, I guess, to think about it, the transfer of controlling interests, some of those in the aggregate have already been submitted for this date after May 1st, and that would affect those special documents. If you want to accept the kind of application for this ordinance, think about that in that section as well.
You think you did?
6. in that section.
Well, I'm not supposed to be talking about that other amendment, so I think he's kind of, with that one, he'll capture not holding people back this year, but next year, basically, we're good to go.
Okay. Any other comments? So through the industry, is this an improvement? You're comfortable with this?
Well, I'm comfortable with it, just with the caveat, and Jed, stop me if I'm wrong, but my understanding with AMCO is I have an application for a transfer from a sole proprietor to the LLC, and it's been approved temporarily, but it still has to be on the control board, which will hear in July. So I guess my question is, when does my 10 days start? When we submit it to AMCO and get temporary approval, or when we actually have approved by the board in July? I just don't want to miss these deadlines, and so just for my own understanding of what timeframes we're talking about. For LLCs and corporations corporation, it's a little bit easier, because, you know, you file it with the state of Alaska, and then once it becomes final, then in my head, 10 days starts. But for these other ones where you're, you know, going from a sole proprietorship to an LLC, I just.
You can transfer sole proprietorship license
We've
just
been,
bring it to the LLC license.
actually, no, we've been doing it, and we've been doing it from sole proprietorship, same person, just an LLC that's owned by the same person, they've been doing that.
This is the big distinction between sales license and municipal license. So you can not say, let's say it's actually transfer. But then this time we decided that our licenses are not transferable. So that's really the different processes between the state and municipalities. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I think I believe what the situation is someone who has got a license as a sole proprietor, an individual, decides they want to become a corporation later on. So it's not really changing ownership, it's just that they're creating a corporation to maybe
But in the
protect
world of
personal
business,
assets.
it is changing ownership.
Is that correct?
If you're changing the ownership from one corporation to another, or something like that, in business licensing world, that's still a change of ownership.
Barbara, did you have any thoughts?
I think we're gonna have to think about this, and, I feel like I need to walk through this with Dean and, put my thinking cap on and figure out how this would work for us. There is a section on sole proprietorship, but that isn't covered, so I have to think about it if I could.
I work with this.
Okay. That's good. So you will think about it, and in an S version, you'll have some wording that we'll look at on Tuesday. Okay.
What would the county recommend in terms of the situation like Mr. Christian mentioned, we also require, they're setting up an LLC, but there's one member that owns 100% of it, and the same person.
Well, it's a sense that, I mean, it's really control, it's the issue, right?
It depends on what type of corporation it's for. Well, again, yeah, but my whole point is, whenever you're changing your business structure, in the world of corporations, there's multiple times you can set up. You know, it definitely could be perceived, in my experience, it could be perceived as a difference. Now, there is a sole member LLC, and then there, you know, a lot of times the government treats that as just a sole proprietor. But when you deviate to different types of corporations, I know under tax law anyway, it is treated differently. And so, anyways, did you get your question answered about your 10 days though?
No, but I would also know, like, the person that's controlling the license isn't changing, right? And that's the intent of the, so I think I'm just gonna err on the side of caution, and maybe just submit it at the same time that we submit it to the state, to you guys, or.
It says shall not later than 10 days after an ownership change as described in this section.
What page is that?
So, it's 7 at the bottom. So we do get those notices from the state.
So in section 4, letter A, and it doesn't clearly spelled out, it just says in this section. It would be more clear if it said, you know, from 10 days, you know, when the ownership transfer happened. That would be more clear. But it doesn't say that, it just says that's described in this section. But the way I would read it would be 10 days from the transfer of the ownership.
That's how I would read it.
I mean.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Barbara?
Mr. Weddleton, I did tell you I was gonna think about this, but this is one of the issues that we have to talk about is on page 8, where it's talking about ownership change. It lists 3 type of ownership changes. And the one that, Jana is talking about is not listed here. And in fact, it says, it's for the new section 4 indicates that it doesn't include a transfer prohibited by that main section back at the beginning, which says it's not transferable. But I still wanna take a look at this with Dean, but I think we have a gap between what Jana is talking about and our code.
Barbara, when you and Dean are done working this out, can you get us the information? I don't wanna go in the same meeting Tuesday, look at the S version and just try to figure out what it means. So when you guys figure out what you're talking about, send an email to the seven members so we know ahead of time where you're going. I would appreciate it.
What's your project this afternoon?
That's why we got lots to do now and Tuesday.
So-
I just don't wanna walk into semi chambers now doing what we're dealing with.
Why, can we back up for just a second? Why does this have to be passed on Tuesday?
Doesn't have to be, I'm just saying if they get together.
Yeah.
It might be helpful to look at the liquor license,
She's got her hand up.
regs on this too.
Barbara?
It does have some urgency, since they have to apply for these licenses and we're asking you to make it retroactive. I think Dean commented that, so the renewal part is really important to us because we are doing renewals now. But perhaps the transfer and the controlling interest issues aren't quite as urgent for us. Obviously, we like to get that done, but it isn't as urgent. So maybe, I don't wanna have two ordinances or ask Dean to separate them. But if we can't figure this out, maybe that's what we have to do.
One last thing, not on this subject, just so that people can get it on their calendar. We have arranged for a tour of a manufacturing facility, and that would be at 10 a.m. a week from today,
Is that the one making brownies?
over on Porcupine Street. Justin is Einstein.
Yeah, it was the very first application you guys approved, yeah, the very.
And so, a week from today, 10 a.m.
The samples are not being encouraged.
Samples are not allowed.
That's correct.
So we're checking your bag before you leave.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a change. So are we done with licensing then? So as far as this change of ownership from sole proprietor to another structure, we're a little bit in limbo at this point, so you'll look
I
at it.
think we need to be.
And I just, as a group though, it's the key element though, is controlling interest. And I think Amy, you're just concerned that maybe the definition of that changes if you go from a sole proprietorship to a.
Yeah, I don't know, you'd have to look at law, because I'm sure there's case law on it, so.
Could be an S corporation, I mean, there's.
I mean, the member of the LLC always has to be reported, and it's a violation of the regulations on the state and muni side to have hidden interest, so it's just the person, so it's the designated licensee, which maybe we need to start creating like terms for these, controlling people. It's just really protect him to make sure he doesn't get sued personally, his house and stuff.
Right, so you're, and you're seeing this, people start off as a sole proprietorship, or perhaps a partnership at some point, they may want to switch, and it's not unusual in small business to do that.
Yeah.
To switch to an LLC or S corp or something. And that would be a problem if that became a whole new license.
Well, yeah, it just wouldn't make too much sense.
Well, I agree with you, I don't think it should be a whole new license, but there's specific terms that are used, and sometimes when you change the way an ownership's held, even if it's by the same person, there could be just repercussions.
But we would say, as Dean looks at this, the goal is change of control.
Yeah.
And so if a change to a different structure does not create a change of control, then we might want to write this to allow that change without problem. Is that, are we comfortable with that? Did you get that, Dean?
This control.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. To change this actually, this is
Nick?
I'd just like to talk 1 minute about the license renewal. I just did this the other day, and I left the building on the weren't there, but I felt very uncomfortable with, I didn't know where I stood, and maybe that's because Mandy wasn't there. I walked in and handed an application, and I said, does it look, am I good? Yep, you're good. And as I'm going down the elevator, I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm like, going to get a notice, it says you'll provide notice, but it doesn't say written notice. Was it the verbal notice, or 3 weeks will I get a call saying, you haven't turned in your application?
So,
So it was very weird,
Yeah.
and I felt very uncomfortable because I have so much writing on the line that I just handed something in that I'm not positive I know what the next step is. So, something to think about. I don't know if other people have done it, but I felt very odd.
Perfect. Jason, you've been online, do you have something?
You know, I want to really thank everyone for accommodating me and letting me call in, and I think the discussion today was pretty thorough. I shared some of Jana's concerns about the transfer of controlling interest, because this is something that I've been wrestling with the state a little bit as well, and I think the community is in a difficult spot of having to, in some ways, mimic what the state is trying to accomplish, and without necessarily having the same resources or systems or processes in place. And I think that, you know, what was discussed today seemed to capture most of the types of business transactions that can occur. But I think this idea of a controlling interest is a little bit tricky to pin down. And I, you know, it was a little bit difficult to follow along with a couple of points, but I think that, I think you guys covered everything, and I think you're identifying some of the different things that can come up with people transferring from one type of business ownership to another, and transferring percentages of ownership within an existing business. So I guess my concern is that if you have someone who, say, owns 51% of a business, and they transfer 2% of that to another, let's say they have a variety of partners, and they transfer 2% of it, they have 49% now. Like, now there's been a transfer of controlling interest. And I think the difficult situation is pinning down exactly what that means, because they might be with 49%, they might be the majority shareholder, but they don't have a controlling interest. You could be in a situation where no one really has a controlling interest because everyone owns less than 50%. So I think there's still two things to be worked out on that front.
Okay. Thank you. Dean?
Thank you.
I was just going to here. Egg code has T 26 of this application procedure, and it says after an application is made, this county as soon as possible to give notice that is given. So you receive some notice from the clerk's office that it's rather than for 10% reviewed, that isn't getting reviewed.
Yeah, so they're kind of saying, okay, we've received it, but I'll do an initial review of them and let you know how all of the things have been submitted. It's a complete application, and then we'll do our review.
It probably would help if you.
Yeah, and I
But you weren't.
and I will be sending out, I have not started the reviews yet for the renewals on highway for more of the state ones to come in. But there will be an email that will go out notifying everybody that has turned in their renewal that, you know, we've received it. Either this is missing or it's all of the required supporting documentation is supplied, and you'll be sent notice when it's gonna go before the assembly. So there will be an email going out.
Okay, we're losing people. We good?